About 5 years ago, if someone had asked me who I was, I would have answered with a quiet, proud smile, saying, "My name is Anaya." I was that young woman who carried the Sharma family name, daughter of Ramsh and Dvika. I grew up amid the vibrant colors and ancient traditions of Hinduism, deeply loving my gods and honoring each ritual with devotion. My life revolved around this love for spirituality, for my family, and for the faith that, I believed, defined exactly who I was and where I belonged. I was born in a small village near Pune, India, a place where routine and simplicity blended with the richness of ancestral traditions. Our home was neither luxurious nor sophisticated, but there was something precious there, the strength of family ties and genuine pride in our beliefs. My father was a hardworking man, the owner of a small shop who supported his family with daily effort, while my mother dedicated herself entirely to caring for us, keeping the home filled with love and faith. We weren't perfect, as no family is, but we were united, and this unity gave meaning to my childhood. From a very young age, faith was part of my daily life. Every morning, the aroma of incense filled the house, mingling with the soft sound of my mother's voice chanting mantras. She moved with grace, her sari impeccably draped, her forehead marked with the traditional red mark that signified our devotion. I watched her in awe as she prepared the altar, engaging in a deep connection with the gods. By the age of 5, I was already learning the mantras and sacred songs, the names and stories of gods like Shiva, Ganesha, and Durga, whose images decorated the walls of our home temple. To me, they were not just figures. They were invisible protectors, friends, and guides in whom I placed my trust. I strove to observe all the traditions, fasting on holy days, offering fresh flowers, lighting lamps with hands trembling with devotion. I even sacrificed meals, believing these small sacrifices would strengthen my connection with the gods and ensure their protection for me and my family. At school, I wasn't the brightest or most popular student, but I was always known for my discipline and respect. Teachers liked me, not just for following the rules, but because I demonstrated genuine respect for the people around me. At home, I assumed my role responsibly. I helped my mother in the kitchen, prayed twice a day, and made a point of respecting my elders, touching their feet as a sign of reverence, and washing my hands before meals, as we were taught. My most sincere desire was to be the perfect daughter, one my parents could be proud of, a living reflection of the virtues taught in our religion. However, behind this calm and devout image, something inside me was beginning to break, a feeling of sadness I couldn't yet fully understand. This silent pain began to grow when I was 17. My older brother, who until then seemed like an essential part of our family, had a major argument with my father and decided to leave home without looking back. Only later did we learn that he had adopted another religion, a fact our father forbade us to mention. This imposed silence felt like a wall between us and him. My mother, in turn, spent nights crying in secret, a cry that echoed throughout the house, and that I felt deeply, even without understanding the full reasons. After that episode, something changed in our home. Peace was replaced by an invisible emptiness, an open wound that seemed unhealable. Sensing the fragility of our family, I began to cling even more tightly to my faith. I thought that if I prayed more fervently, if I devoted myself completely to the rituals and daily trips to the temple, perhaps everything could return to the way it had been before. I bowed before the idols for hours, until my forehead turned red from the effort, and shed sincere tears, asking for restoration and protection. Yet despite my devotion, I felt a growing distance. Those stone-carved eyes, which once seemed to watch over me, now remained cold and silent, indifferent to my cry. The feeling of speaking into emptiness began to dominate my days and nights. Then, like thunder amid this inner storm, illness struck. At first, it seemed like just ordinary fatigue, the result of daily exertion, but gradually the fatigue transformed into something more serious. My body began to weaken. Unexplained pains arose. I lost weight rapidly, and mysterious fevers came and went for no apparent reason. We went to several doctors, but none could diagnose what ailed me. The medications were ineffective, and uncertainty grew along with my fear. I still remember my father's desperate look when, one morning, he saw me unable to get out of bed. In an attempt to help me, he brought me more incense and flowers, seeking spiritual relief. My mother, filled with concern, asked a priest to come and chant around me, hoping to drive away any negative energy that might have infiltrated our home. They spoke of spirits, karma from past lives, and other mystical explanations that at the time I accepted as truth. But despite all this faith and effort, I felt increasingly weak, not only physically but also spiritually. The worst pain came not from the illness itself, but from the overwhelming sense of abandonment, feeling that the gods I had loved since childhood had left me alone, that the love and protection I sought from them were no longer present. It was a void I didn't know how to fill. Amidst the silent darkness of that night, my tears flowed in desperate pleas. I begged, heartfelt, almost whispering into the void, "Please, listen to me. If I've made a mistake, forgive me, guide me, show me the right path to follow." Each word was a silent scream rising from my wounded soul, searching for a sign, an answer. But again, the silence persisted, cold and relentless. Nothing changed. That emptiness seemed to consume not only my body, but also my hope. Then, one afternoon, as I lay on the old cot near the window, a terrifying feeling came over me. An unbearable pressure began to tighten around my chest, growing rapidly until I could no longer breathe properly. My mother was in the kitchen, and I tried to call her name, desperate for help, but my voice wouldn't come. It was as if the air had been drained from my body. The light in the room, which should have been bathed in late afternoon sunlight, began to dim, as if an invisible shadow had settled there. My hands grew cold, my vision blurred, and the world around me began to spin, not chaotically, but slowly, as if I were being sucked into an unknown place. I could hear my own heart slowing, felt each beat grow fainter, until it almost disappeared. Deep inside, I knew something terribly wrong was happening. I tried to move, to scream, to call for help, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if, little by little, I was disconnecting from that world. A strange sensation overcame me, as if I were falling into myself, slipping through an invisible abyss between what I was and what I was becoming. The air separating me from the world seemed to be pulled away, and for the last time, before everything went completely dark, I heard my mother's desperate scream as she ran down the hallway. I had stopped breathing. My spirit had departed that fragile body. I died. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something that would completely transform every belief I'd ever held. What happened next, what I saw, felt, and experienced, changed everything. My life, my faith, my soul, nothing would be the same again. And that is the truth I share, not a fable created to impress, but the raw, profound reality of who I truly am. It all began at that exact moment my spirit left my body. The moment I died, I didn't realize I had left life behind. At first, everything around me became strange and still. The usual noise of the house disappeared, the sound of my mother's hurried footsteps, the distant voices of the neighbors. Everything went silent. It wasn't like simply falling asleep. It was as if I had stepped out of time and space, floating in a silent limbo. My body remained there, on that old wooden cot by the window, but I was no longer inside it. The pain that consumed me was gone. The heaviness in my chest, the tremors, everything was gone. There was only silence, and then something new happened, a sensation I'd never felt before. I began to rise, literally. I looked down and saw my own body, my lips parted, my hands hanging lifeless, my face pale. I saw my mother drop the pot she was holding, the sound of the vase breaking echoing like a warning. She screamed my name, running to me, shaking my body, gently slapping my cheeks, begging for a reaction. But I couldn't respond. I couldn't speak, move, or touch. It was as if I were merely an invisible spectator of the scene, watching everything from above, like someone watching a movie without being able to intervene. Despite my physical incapacity, I felt everything intensely. The overwhelming sadness, the heartbreaking confusion, my mother's despair. And then they arrived. My father, wide-eyed and pale-faced, a worried neighbor, a man from the temple we knew well. My mother cried loudly, almost desperately. They laid my body on the ground, tried to revive me, performed chest massages, and frantic attempts to bring me back. Someone called the local clinic, while everyone shouted instructions and prayers. But to me, it all sounded distant, as if their voices were coming from underwater. I felt separated from them by a thick, invisible, and cold veil. I distinctly remember thinking, confused, why are they panicking? I'm here, right here. But in truth, I was no longer in that world. I was no longer part of the reality they knew. It was then that the room changed. The light faded, not like the sun setting, but like a shadow spreading from every direction. The walls began to dissolve, the ceiling disappeared, and what had once been my room now crumbled before my eyes. I was no longer floating in familiar space, but being pulled upward by an invisible force, firm, yet gentle. It was as if something larger was carrying me to an unknown place, a threshold between life and what would come next. The air around me felt unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just a breeze or the simple movement of the wind. It was a living, dense, almost palpable presence, as if the atmosphere itself carried an energy I couldn't explain in words. It was an invisible weight, an awareness around me that made me realize I was no longer in that world. Suddenly, everything changed, and I found myself inside a tunnel, but it wasn't made of bricks or stones, or any physical material I could recognize. It was a tunnel made of light and space, infinite, stretching before me like a portal to something greater. As I moved further, I realized the tunnel wasn't empty. There were sounds, soft, distant voices, like echoes from other times and places. Some voices wept, others screamed, and though I couldn't clearly make out the words, I felt the emotional charge of each sound. The edges of the tunnel shimmered with indistinct shadows, ethereal figures barely discernible. The tunnel walls seemed to contain something else: memories, stories, pain accumulated by countless souls who had passed through. I felt this pain pulsing through the space around me, as if connected to every corner of the place. I was moving fast, faster than anything I'd ever experienced. But strangely, I felt no wind or pressure against me. There was only speed and a deep, almost sacred silence. Then the light ahead began to shine brighter, beckoning me forward. But along with this brightness, something shifted. A strange tension began to pull me back, as if two invisible forces were in conflict, one pulling me toward the light, while the other tried to hold me back, pulling me away, into the shadows. It was at that moment that I realized, or perhaps sensed, that there was something else behind me, something dark, heavy, and icy. I don't know if I actually turned, or perhaps it was just a perception, but I became aware of a sinister presence emanating a cold, oppressive energy. They were like tall, thin shadows, lined along the tunnel walls. Their eyes were empty, dark, lifeless, watching me with frightening intensity. Some whispered words I couldn't understand. Others approached, trying to touch me, but they couldn't. There was something protecting me, an invisible force greater than those shadowy figures, preventing them from reaching me. I could feel the hatred they carried, the profound sadness, and the searing torment that consumed them. They were not the gods I knew and loved. They were not beings of light or benevolent deities. They were lost, broken, angry souls, trapped in a limbo of pain and revolt. Some screamed in strange languages, incomprehensible to me, while others remained silent. A silence so heavy it seemed to scream louder than any sound. Fear did not overcome me, but the impact of witnessing this reality hidden from the living made me tremble. It was a sight that shook me to the core. I turned my gaze forward, and the light had changed. It wasn't just a bright glow, but a living, pulsating light, filled with warmth and an authority I'd never felt before. It had no defined shape, but radiated a presence so powerful it filled the entire space around it. As I approached, the shadowy figures behind me began to fade, and the chill I'd felt slowly dissipated, giving way to an indescribable sense of peace. When I finally reached the heart of that light, something happened that changed everything I had ever known in my years of fasting, prayer, and chanting. I felt peace, not the tranquil peace that comes from silence or rest, but a deep, true peace that penetrates every part of my being. For the first time, I felt completely seen and understood. Every flaw, every pride, every fear, doubt, and secret thought was exposed before that light. But instead of shame or condemnation, I felt a love so pure I couldn't hold back the tears. I didn't see a golden throne or a bearded man like in some images I knew. But deep in my soul, I knew that light was a being, a sacred person, pure and righteous, full of love and justice. For the first time, I realized that this presence wasn't Shiva, Durga, Krishna, or any deity I'd grown up worshipping. It was someone else entirely, something much greater and more real. And then I heard a voice, not in my ears but within every part of me, a voice charged with power and mercy that said only one thing, simple and profound. "Anaya, why are you so far away from me?" That question pierced everything I thought I knew about myself. shattering any answer I could give. It was a call to return, to find my way back to the true love I'd been cut off from. I had no defense, no justification to offer. There, before that light, there was no room for excuses, no rationalizations. I simply wept, not because I was being judged or accused, but because for the first time, I could see myself clearly, with all the honesty I had always lacked. I saw, unfiltered, who I truly was, and in that moment, I understood that I was not in the presence of a God made in my image and likeness, a figure molded by my own concepts and beliefs. No, I was before the one who had created me, the true creator, the author of my existence. Yet something inside me told me my journey was far from over. There was more to be revealed, something that would forever change my understanding of eternity, of what it means to exist beyond the life I knew. Time, in that place, didn't follow the rules of the world I'd lived in until then. I don't know how long I remained in that tunnel, immersed in that warm light, feeling simultaneously small and infinitely loved. Each moment seemed to stretch on for an eternity, and yet, everything happened with an incalculable speed. The light that had enveloped me, that powerful, loving presence that had spoken to me so clearly, began to slowly recede. It wasn't a rejection, far from it, more like a gentle gesture, a preparation for something greater that I needed to understand, even if I didn't yet know what it was. Suddenly, the intense heat was gone, and the glow that had once illuminated every corner began to dim. The peace that had filled my being vanished, giving way to a dense, almost suffocating atmosphere that seemed made of smoke and darkness. And the silence? It was broken by a sound that pierced my heart. Screams, moans, desperate cries, voices that seemed to find no rest or relief. I didn't walk to that place. I was led there, not by force, but as if an inevitable necessity brought me to witness something I could never ignore. Before me stretched an abyss so dark I could barely make out its shapes. But what I did see, I will never forget. The ground seemed alive, cracking and bleeding a dark fire unlike any fire I had ever known. A fire that emitted no light, but only pain. Black flames danced around, burning everything around them without heat, only suffering. The smell that permeated the air was unbearable, a stench of decay mixed with deep, almost spiritual despair, as if all that was good was being consumed by the flames of damnation. There were beings there, people, or rather souls, but not like the ones I knew on Earth. They were naked souls, stripped of all hope, shrouded in dense shadows of anguish. Their mouths were open in endless screams, their hands outstretched in search of help, but all was in vain. I saw some desperately trying to climb out of deep holes, others crawling in circles, trapped in endless suffering. Some wept silently, gritting their teeth, as if trying to bite their own tongues to escape the pain they felt. But there was no way out. There was no escape. One woman screamed incessantly, repeating, "I didn't know. I didn't know," as if her ignorance were the root of all this torment. Another, desperate, clung to an idol, a small elephant statuette, which for me symbolized Ganesha, one of my most beloved deities. But the idol was melting in her hands, burning her skin, and still she wouldn't let go. She screamed for it, hoping it would save her, but there was no answer. Gradually, the statuette turned to ash, and the sound of her despair echoed through the stifled air of that place. All around me, enormous statues of gods I had known and worshipped were falling, disintegrating. Their stones cracked, and their eyes seemed to bleed a viscous black liquid. Some even laughed. Yes, laughed, mocking those who had once worshipped them with faith and devotion. I saw a spirit bow before a golden image, begging for help, only to see the statue collapse upon him with a crushing weight, crushing his already fragile soul. The air vibrated with mocking voices, exposing the cruel truth behind the lies so many had believed. I trembled there, overcome with fear and sadness, trying to block out those terrible sounds, covering my ears so they wouldn't penetrate any deeper. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. And then came the most painful moment of all. Some of those souls turned their eyes to me. Their faces, oh God, their faces were contorted in such profound sadness, such immense suffering, that I felt as if they hoped I could offer them a help I didn't have. They looked at me with a mixture of hope and despair, as if I could somehow be the answer to their endless torment. Some recognized me. I don't know how. I really don't know, because on Earth I'd never seen them. But there, In that place, they knew me. One of them cried out in a hoarse, desperate voice, "Why didn't you tell me?" Another cried out bitterly, "You had the truth, the light. You saw it and didn't tell us." I cried. I cried with every fiber of my being, with a pain that came from every part of me. I didn't have the answers they needed. I had nothing to offer. Then a voice thundered through the room, not the same gentle voice I had heard before, but a voice filled with ruthless justice. This is what deception brings. This is where truth is rejected. I fell to my knees, and there, in that moment, I understood something that both terrified and clarified me. This was not a place made for people. It was a place made for the enemy, for those who rebelled against the truth. But still, the people were there, not for lack of love, but because they had rejected that love, by choice. I wanted to leave. I wanted to beg for mercy, not for myself, but for those souls trapped in that darkness. And then everything changed again. From the edge of that oppressive shadow, a light burst forth. Not a mere bolt of lightning, not a faint spark. It was a pure, radiant, powerful presence. It didn't just illuminate the surrounding darkness, it exposed it, driving back the torment in flames, silencing the screams. I knew deep down that he had arrived. He wasn't a golden statue. He wasn't a god from our temples. He didn't wield weapons or ride fantastical beasts. But his authority, his majesty, his holiness and power were undeniable. And yet there was an unparalleled tenderness about him. His eyes met mine, and in that look I felt everything: profound love, immense sadness, absolute understanding, and a pain that seemed to carry the weight of all lost souls. He wasn't angry with me. He was mourning for the souls, for the mistake, for what could have been but wasn't. He reached out to me, not physically, but spiritually. When he did, I saw the scars on the palms of his hands. Scars. That's when I knew. That was Jesus. I had never spoken his name before, never believed it was real. I thought he was just the god of foreigners, a distant figure unknown to me. But in that moment, I knew he was not one god among many. He was the truth, the way, the life. The light I had seen was him. I collapsed. I cried uncontrollably, with an emotion so deep it seemed to tear my soul apart. I whispered, "I didn't know. I didn't know it was you." And he spoke, not with judgment, but with such immense compassion it took my breath away. "You were mine, even when you didn't know me. But you need to go back." My voice broke in supplication. "Please don't send me back. I want to stay. I want to be with you." But he just repeated, firmly and lovingly, "They need to hear it. Go tell them what you saw." In that instant, I was consumed by the light, not burned, but transformed. I felt love flood me like fire, warm and cleansing. And then, suddenly, I fell. I fell quickly back down the tunnel, passing through the veil between life and death, returning to the weight of my body. When I opened my eyes, I was back on that old cot, panting, with my mother's hand clutching mine, and the room resounding with the mingled cries of shock and joy. But I wasn't the same. I had died. I had seen eternity. And now, he had a mission: to tell the truth to the world. The return was not smooth. When I left Jesus' presence, I felt as if a part of me had been ripped from home. The light that held me, the warmth that enveloped me, the overwhelming love. I didn't want to leave. But when he said go, I knew I had no choice. His words were not suggestions. They were truths. And with that truth came a strength, a force that pulled me, pushed me, made me unstoppable. In an instant, I was falling. I can't describe the speed. It was like being thrown by a storm of wind, pressure, through layers of darkness, space, and memory. I could hear my own voice echoing around me, desperate screams that seemed to come from every direction, the wails of those trapped in eternal suffering. Suddenly, everything fell silent. A heavy silence fell, and then the pain came. An unimaginable pain, surpassing any physical suffering I had ever known. It was searing, crushing, a pressure that seemed to tear at every fiber of my being. It was as if my body were being ripped in half, and I could barely bear what I felt. Then, with a sudden start, I opened my eyes, gasping violently. My chest rose and fell as if I'd been submerged in deep water for hours without breathing. My throat burned, dry and raw, and my head throbbed with a pain that felt like it was about to split my skull in half. At first, I couldn't move. My arms and legs felt completely stiff, heavy, as if they'd turned to stone. I blinked several times, trying to adjust to the bright light that pierced my eyes like sharp blades. It was then that I heard the screams, but they weren't mine. It was my mother's desperate voice, calling my name in her desperation. She fell to her knees beside me, crying, trembling, begging me to come back. My father stood in the doorway, paralyzed, his hands trembling, his face drawn with fear. A neighbor was backing away slowly, as if he'd seen a ghost right there. A woman who had been chanting a mantra moments before now stood motionless, in absolute silence, clearly shocked. I had returned, but I wasn't whole, not the same as before. The doctors had been called quickly. I remember one of them had already declared me dead, that my body showed no pulse or breathing. For several minutes I lay there, lifeless, a still, silent body. And then, inexplicably, there I was again, sitting up slowly, coughing, struggling to draw air into my lungs, crying without understanding exactly why. One of the doctors pressed his fingers gently against my wrist, and when he felt a faint pulse, he looked at his colleagues with wide eyes and said in a stunned whisper, "She's alive." Another doctor gently patted my cheeks, trying to keep me conscious, while I grasped for anything that would keep me in this world. My mother cried nonstop, repeating my name between sobs and frantic questions. "Anaya, what happened to you? Where did you go? Why did you come back?" I wanted to respond, but my voice had simply disappeared. Only disjointed sounds, ragged breaths, and faint moans emerged. In the days that followed, my body felt as if it had been torn apart and reassembled, fragile and brittle. Walking was a challenge that cost me every ounce of strength. I spent endless hours sleeping, trying to escape the seemingly endless exhaustion. Food made me constantly nauseous. The lights in my room seemed to blind me, and sounds, even the most ordinary ones, came as deafening roars. My mind spun endlessly, bogged down by the weight of what I knew had been real, because it wasn't a dream. I hadn't imagined anything. I was there, in that place between life and death, in the presence of the one true God. I saw the torment of those who were lost. I felt the truth in its rawest, most brutal form, and I was sent back with a mission burning in my heart, a mission that seemed impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't experienced what I had. My family was relieved and grateful that I was alive, but when I tried to tell them everything I'd seen, I was met with doubt and rejection. An uncle dismissed it as perhaps a vision caused by our gods. A cousin suggested I was somewhere between life and death, but that it wasn't real. Yet I knew deep down that it wasn't an illusion. It wasn't reincarnation, nor the cycle of karma our culture taught. I hadn't seen Shiva, or Ganesha, or any of the gods I'd served and honored my entire life. I had seen Jesus. I hadn't even known his name before that moment, had never read a single verse of the Bible. And yet now, that truth filled me and haunted me, a reality I couldn't escape. On silent nights, when the house was plunged into darkness and my body ached, I would whisper to him, "Are you still with me?" And in the deep silence of my heart, I felt his answer clear, sweet, and constant. "I have never left your side." It was then that the confusion that had consumed me began to give way to something greater, a serene clarity, an inexplicable peace, and a renewed purpose. I hadn't returned from death simply to continue living as before. I had been called to live differently, to speak, to warn, to share the truth that so many avoid or fail to grasp. When I opened my eyes in that hospital bed, I was no longer the same Anaya everyone knew. I was a transformed woman, carrying a testimony that would change my life forever. My body was weak, trembling in every fiber, and with every breath I took, it felt like I was inhaling both fire and ice, a painful, strange mixture that burned my skin from the inside and froze my soul. But despite this, something inside me was alive in a way I had never experienced before. It wasn't simply a return to life, it was a rebirth, a profound transformation that touched every corner of my being. For many days I remained silent, not because I wanted to turn away, or because there were no words, but because of the crushing weight of what I had seen and understood. It silenced me, made me rethink everything I believed. My family, sitting around me, thought I was still fragile, fighting the effects of fever, convulsions, and what the doctors called clinical death, a phenomenon they themselves could not explain. But I knew something far greater than any medical treatment had happened to me. And then, one quiet morning, with a hesitant voice, I asked for a Bible. The silence that followed was almost deafening. My mother stood still, as if struck by an unexpected shock. My sister, who was feeding me a spoonful of porridge, dropped it onto the plate without a word. My father, usually firm and composed, quickly got up and left the room without exchanging a single word. That simple, almost humble request shook the foundations of my household in a way I could not have imagined. When I began to share with them what I had seen on that journey beyond life, the man dressed in white, shining brighter than the sun, the idols melting and burning, the desperate souls crying out for truth, their reactions were of fear and denial. "You must have had a nightmare," my uncle said in a hard voice. "It's the effects of the medicine," insisted another. But I knew what I had witnessed. It was not a dream, nor an illusion of my weary mind. It was more real than anything I had ever experienced, more real than my own breath. I stood before absolute truth, and it had a name I had never dared to pronounce before: Jesus. I grew up in a Hindu family, where his name was unknown and even avoided, but in that moment, Jesus became the most vivid and present reality in my heart. I began to pray to him secretly, no longer with mantras or bowing to statues, but speaking from the depths of my being, like a daughter seeking comfort and love from her father. The peace that filled me in these silent prayers was the same peace I had felt in the presence of that radiant light in the other life. But my new faith was not well received. Relatives began to distance themselves. My father refused to speak to me. Rumors began to circulate around the neighborhood. They said I had gone mad, that I was possessed by demons, that I had betrayed our culture and traditions. Every cruel comment, every disapproving look, reminded me of the anguished cries of souls in that eternal darkness. And in that moment, I was unable to remain silent. I began telling my story to anyone who would listen. At first, cautiously, to close friends, cousins, and even strangers I met at the market. Gradually, I gained the courage to speak in small groups, to women who had spent their lives worshiping idols and rituals, to people who, like me, were lost in traditions that brought neither relief nor hope. I told them that there was a God who truly listens, who saves, who loves, a living and present God. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't understand all the mysteries, but I knew what I had seen with my own eyes. I had touched eternity, seen the torment of the soul, felt the love of the one who conquered death, and I knew I needed to share this with the world. Those still trapped in empty rituals and fear of the darkness needed to hear the truth. There was a time when I would never have dared to question what I called sacred, but now, with clarity, I realized that it was merely a shadow before the true light. The one who welcomed me into that realm beyond life is not a religion, nor a statue, nor a distant idea. He is alive and continues to call people to himself. That's why I'm here today, sharing all of this with you. I'm not seeking attention, nor do I want to cause division. I do this because I love my people and want them to know the truth that now lives within me. I was once blind, living in the darkness of the beliefs that surrounded me, but now I see. And this truth needs to be shared. It needs to be heard.